this is the biggest commodities exporter in the world. We're talking Russia and Ukraine put together. Now, this is going to hurt. Tell us about what's happening with, let's say, the wheat complex I mentioned and these agri-commodities in a holistic manner.
All right, Richard, you're quite right saying that they're very important exporters of agri-commodities, but particularly wheat. Thing is, if these two countries are taken off the world market for one reason or another, then that is going to cause prices to rise. But the impact has been greater because we're in a period where supply is tightish to tight for most of those crop commodities. So the price impact has been greater because of that context.
Now, if we take a look at wheat, for instance, I mean, we're not feeling the full effects because I think the harvest is until July or August even in Ukraine. So it's going to be really a question of what happens then, right?
Oh, yeah, quite right. So, in terms of timing, the invasion in February was not the worst time of the year for it to happen because probably much of what was going to be exported from both countries, on the wheat side at least, had probably already gone or was due to be on the water shortly. So that has probably got to market. The bigger impact comes when you get a full-year impact. So going forward now, so they'll both harvest or be due to harvest in the middle of 2022. Russia probably won't have any trouble harvesting. It may have more trouble exporting, directly or indirectly via sanctions. But Ukraine will have a lot of trouble harvesting, and even if people can harvest, it's very, very difficult to get out of the country. So the logistics chain is not working there. Now, our presumption for the time being is that this will not be over by mid-year, and indeed, the outcome is more likely a stalemate where Russia still has significant troop presence in the Ukraine as well. So, the problem for them is going to be, even if they can harvest, where they get the fuel for and so on, where do they put the wheat and where does it go as well? So there is going to be a substantial hole in the world wheat balance sheet going into 2022.
Tobin, we've not seen, as you said, the worst as a supply shortage and the war continues. How much more upside are you expecting in terms of prices for wheat and other soft commodities?
I think in the context now, what we've seen is a lot of the rise. So, we're talking back, wheat can easily get back to $11, depending on what happens with how restrictive any further sanctions would be directly or indirectly on Russia's exports from the 2022 crop. It can get back there easily. The thing is, that tight supply context, though, is it means that any other crop accident this year, crop problem with the weather this year, is going to have a much greater impact. So, our view is that the skew on price risk is maybe a little bit to the downside, but a lot to the upside. And there are plenty of risks on the horizon there. The extended La Nina event we've seen, which has lasted into the northern spring and may even get to the northern summer, that usually upsets the weather. It still has a potential to do so for South American crops, particularly second corn crops, but it also potentially has creates very difficult and dry weather for summer crops in the Northern Hemisphere, particularly in North America.
Talk to us about alternative markets. We know, and understandably, countries like Egypt looking to India for wheat and so on and so forth. I mean, to what extent can they counter the shortage from Ukraine, from Russia?
I think they can do a lot. It doesn't mean that, at one end of the income chain where wheat's got quite expensive, there won't be shortages in some countries. We expect there won't be actual stock out of wheat as such. What we've seen so far is that jump in prices has done what prices do, which is to kind of solve part of the problem. The one stage there, the only viable source to replace wheat that could no longer be shipped out of the Black Sea was the US, and the price spiked very, very high. But that price spike, incentivised and paid for the more expensive logistics out of India. It also did it enabled Australia to open up some more port capacity as well. So that's done it there. So there is a smoothing out here, but you needed the higher price to pay for that.
Tobin,
and that's kind of markets work.
Tobin,
Sorry.
In the global food supply chain and in food processing, edible oils are hugely important. We've seen what's happening with Malaysia. Palm oil there is now, I think, the reserves are at the lowest in a year and expected actually to perhaps be eviscerated at some point. Then, because we've got Ukraine, big sunflower oil producer, or sunflowers, I should say, here as well. And this is going to be something which will be much more subtle in the food chain supply, or food supply chain, I should say.
You're quite right, Rashad, because it's people use obviously cooking oil directly that comes from sunflower seeds and obviously from palm. But it's an ingredient in so many food items and even a lot of other household items as well. So that pass through to the consumer price level, the price rises we've seen so far even probably hasn't got to the consumer level yet entirely, and so there's more to come. And if prices go up further, then that will also help fuel consumer level price inflation, probably globally.